had in parentheses in the title of the story about maybe Nick Seeler coming off the trade market. And we've talked about this. The Flyers have a lot of defensemen. Something's gonna have to give. Do they look to re-sign Walker? Do they look to re-sign Seeler? Do they trade one? Do they trade both? Give people an idea now of where things stand between the Flyers and Nick Seeler.
Yeah, so just to kind of give a little bit of background into this, while everybody around the sport of hockey was checking in on me last week, I got I got word that in one of those conversations that the Flyers were talking to Nick Seeler and about a possible contract extension, and I thought a little bit weird that it would be now that they would do that, right? I just thought it was just a weird time, but I didn't think much of it. I was just like, oh, okay, well, we'll see what happens. Kind of, play it by ear. I hadn't heard anything about that from within the organization. And then yesterday morning, I think it was yesterday morning, Elliot Friedman puts it out on 32 Thoughts. And, talking about the Flyers wanting to bring back Seeler. And I was like, well, okay. So that is kind of out there. And so I said, well, you know what, let me see if I can get a little bit more detail, a little bit more insight into this. So I started calling around to some folks, and what I was able to glean from it is this, that yes, they really like Nick Seeler. They love his character. They think he's the kind of player that fits really well into what they're doing. And that there's, a real possibility that they re-sign him, for an extension beyond this year. Obviously, he's a free agent at the end of the year. However, from what I was told, it doesn't seem like it's anything that's really imminent right now. And that's because the Flyers kind of want to leave the door open, and leaving it open for a situation where, hey, you never know, teams might come in and offer you something that is pretty enticing, as opposed to keeping the player, although they really like the player. A lot can happen over the course of the next 6 weeks, and so what I was told was it will be a lot like the Scott Laughton situation was 2 years ago, where it's going to probably come down to the wire. The Flyers will have some sort of a contract ready to go if they don't trade Nick Seeler, and then they will sign him to that deal if a trade doesn't happen. But there's no 100% guarantee that they're going to lock him up. It just sounds like, it's something that they want to consider keeping him, but let's wait and see, because teams could get desperate. We've seen it at the trade deadline every year where guys get traded for draft picks and you go, that guy was worth a first round pick. That guy was worth a second round pick. Like you're stunned. You're a little surprised. So I think it makes sense for Danny to wait and see what he gets as far as offers on the table. And then once you determine that value, you decide, is it worth trading for assets or keeping the player and signing him to a contract extension?
Yeah,
it's interesting.
How a lot of stuff goes into it, right? Like the sign or trade. It's not as much. It's harder to calculate the salaries during the season, right? That's why it becomes like when you get your team during the year, that's kind of your team, because it's just so hard to trade salary for salary. So I don't know. I mean, listen, I like Nick Seeler. I mean, it's a great story. There's a lot of great stories like that, now, because there's the ability to have them. If guys want to come in and work hard, play hard, block shots, do a lot of the nitty gritty stuff, you can be a third pair defenseman in this league now, or a seventh guy, and stick around for a decade. There's a lot of jobs. There's just not a lot of great players to fill every one of those jobs. So when a guy like Seeler has stepped up and played really, really well, man, I'll tell you what, I find him to be a real luxury to have on your team. Yeah. And again, I admire him as a person, as a player, the way he plays for his teammates, for his team. You can just tell, even in our era, like back when I played, he would have been, I could just tell, a great teammate. Like I would have really enjoyed playing with him just from the outside looking in. And
they blocked 16. They blocked 16 shots in the game last night. Nick Seeler,
I mean, those are serious numbers.
Yeah. Nick Seeler blocked 8. Yep. 8 of the 16 were Nick Seeler.
It's crazy.
Yeah, and those are bread and butter type plays, because it hurts. I was a shot blocking guy too. I was always first or second on the team most every year when I played. We were at the top, and it hurt. Some of them don't, but there's times where you're laying down or you're kneeling down, and it's coming, and there's nothing you can do about it, because that's what you do for your team. And I don't think there's a place on my body that hasn't tasted a puck of some kind, and But that's how you build teams. That's how you end. Like, that's when you say it's good to score goals. That's how you glue yourself together with plays like that in sports, and that adage will never change.
Well, so
that glues teams together.
The interesting thing that I wanted to kind of look at it, with you guys, separate from what I wrote, we came into the season and we looked at this blue line and we were kind of like, there's no way that this blue line is going to be any good. Yeah. It's just not. It's not going to be. It's going to be the weakness of this team, right? Mm-hmm. Now here you are. You have Cam York's had a pretty solid season. He struggled early, like maybe the first month, but after that, he's been pretty darn good. Okay, Travis Sanheim had a pretty good start to the season. Kind of fell off a little bit, but he's been pretty solid since. Okay.
Yep.
Then you go out and you trade for Jamie Drysdale, who you think is going to be, one of your better puck moving defenseman going forward. Now you look at a Nick Seeler and you say, well, maybe we want to keep a Nick Seeler as a third pair guy. Ultimately, I mean, he's playing second pair this year, but ultimately as a third pair guy. And then you got some kids coming. You drafted Oliver Bonk in the first round. You got Emil Andre playing top pair minutes down in Lehigh Valley, and Ronnie Addard is also playing down there in big situations. And you sit there and you look at these guys and you go, well, you know what? Maybe maybe you don't have that number one defenseman yet, but maybe you have what's there to make out 2 through 6 or 2 through 7. If you want to count the extra guy who's going to have to rotate in, maybe that's what you have, and it's a surprising thing that you have it. Even though we looked at it at the beginning of the year and said, yeah, maybe one of these guys it fits, and now you have more than that.
Yeah, and that's a good job by the coaching staff, like to get guys to develop them, get them feeling good about themselves. The only thing I say is just to be, and I've told people this, is that as good as this is right now, this isn't a tough evaluation, because what I think the Flyers thought was what we thought was that we're going to come in here, we're going to watch a team unfold how it unfolds, and we're going to be able to make pretty relatively easy decisions based on that. Nobody in management is going to sit here and tell me they knew this would happen. That would be bullshit. Even from hockey people, they're no different than anyone else. So what I'm saying is that this is tougher now because there are a lot of salvageable pieces. There's a lot more out there. Now, I don't know if Nick Seeler is going to get you a second round pick. I'm not sure about that. I don't know. I don't know what prices are. Everything seems to change every year. Like we saw a guy get traded last year to Vancouver in the Horvat deal, Beauvillier, and he got traded for a late round pick this year, I think, if I'm not mistaken. So It just depends what teams' needs are at the time. But this is a unique situation, I think, because they really did find guys and they pulled a lot out of these players to try to define who they are, and that's hard to do. But this is what Torts does, though. Usually it takes a year, and then his second year is when everybody kind of flourishes.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Bundy, when you look at the game last night, right? They had 4 goals, 10 different guys registered 1 point.
Yeah.
So there wasn't anything beyond that. And when you look at the players that were putting it up, obviously Lawton scores a goal. He was here before. But who assists Lawton on that goal? Yeah, you had 2 guys that Danny Briere brought in here, Garnet Hathaway and Sean Walker, who were just going to be like guys that are going to get you through a rebuilding season. Turns out both players have been pretty darn good. Who scores in the other goal? Ryan Poehling scores a goal, right? It's kind of like a crash the net. He bunted it into the net is what I wrote. It's like a batter bunting the ball. And it's off of a shot by Zamula, who at the beginning of the season, they weren't 100% sure was going to be a guy that would last here this season. They liked him. They liked him a lot as a prospect, but because he became ineligible for waivers to go back down, it was like the guy's got to play well enough, or else maybe we move on. And he's turned into a guy who's willing to. He's unafraid, is what I meant to say. He's unafraid to take a slap shot or take a shot from the point and get pucks through and create offense at the net, which is how Poehling scores that goal, right? So when you look at those, you look at the people that are contributing and how they're contributing. They're not putting up a ton of points. They're not saying, oh my God, these guys are awesome. But what they are is a heck of a lot better than maybe you thought they were as just extra pieces. They actually fit into the mold of this franchise and into the mold of what Tortorella is putting together. And I think that's a nod to Danny bringing them in first and foremost, and then secondarily a nod to Torts for finding a way to assimilate them and get them to be the types of players that they've been.
It's going to be interesting.
Admittedly so, though. Like Danny even admitted he didn't even know who Sean Walker was, right? like in the summer, like they didn't know a lot about what they got back in that trade. So, and admittedly so, like they weren't sure. They got an extra piece thrown in and it looked good, but nobody knew Sean Walker. Like even us, we were saying, like, what do we know? And then he started to play good for, first 10 games. You're like, wow, this guy's pretty good. And then they had the other young guy playing up here, Louis Belpidio, too. So they had kind of an awkward start, but now they look like they're really coming together as a group. That's good to see.
Before we move on, because it is interesting, and I see a lot of people in the comments, kind of going back and forth about if you're saying that it's a rebuild, like you do have to sell high, and I totally agree. Like I think that the thing that they're going to run into here, at least with Seeler, is if you can get him on a really affordable deal and it's short term, it's like a 2-year deal, and he's not looking for a big raise. This does kind of go back to the Chuck principle that I didn't like at the time with Lawton, which was if you get rid of the guy, you are going to have to sign somebody, or preferably, cultivate them in the organization and just promote them. But you are going to have to replace that guy. If Sealer's not going to break the bank, if he's dirt cheap and is willing to do it on a 2-year deal, then you have to think about it, because he brings the intangibles and he brings things that, like, as you're trying to flip this thing to being a winning team, that you're going to want to have in the lineup. Which I'm honestly a little bit surprised that it's continued as long as it has and that he continues to have success at this level. But he's kind of proven that he's an NHL defenseman. You need him. It's fine. Walker, I think, is the bigger one. Walker seems to be the guy that has the higher likelihood of getting you a higher draft pick. And if he plays well, he's a guy who I don't think fits, ultimately. I don't think he's the one that you look to lock in. But we'll see.